Well, hello everyone. My name is Matthew Taylor and I'd like to welcome you to our Bush Broadcast Summer Webinar, our final webinar for 2023. And boy, are we going to finish off the year with a bang. First up, I must say that I'm joining you today from the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, who are the traditional custodians of this country I'm on today. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians online with us today. We certainly recognise the remarkable Australian environment we strive to conserve is on land that has never been ceded. Now, our final webinar of the year, we would normally invite our CEO to chat about the highlights of the past 12 months. And whilst we will do that, and we'll touch on some good news stories, we are instead today going to focus on an incredible opportunity that has come our way. 2 weeks ago, we were thrilled to announce that Bush Heritage has this incredible prospect of acquiring a new reserve in the spectacular South Australian outback. It's about an hour or so north of Coober Pedy, and it's in painted desert country. It's on two native title determinations, the Unta Karinya Martu Yunkanjara and the Yunkanjara Unta Karinya people. This property is pretty special. It's 235,000 hectares. It's a pastoral property, which makes it about the size of ACT, and it's called Evelyn Downs, which is going to be managed for conservation. The purchase of this property is going to give a huge conservation corridor that spans about 1.9 million hectares of protected land, and it's going to be our biggest to date. So you can imagine we're all very excited about it. The property doesn't just safeguard critical habitat, but it's going to give some extra opportunities to work with the traditional owners who have the Mount Willoughby IPA next door. So altogether, it's going to give us the chance to be influential and manage a landscape over a huge piece of northern South Australia. We thought this was the right time to share some of this story about Evelyn Downs, and in particular, ask you to consider supporting our push to acquire this property, which we'd love to have in the bag by Christmas. More of that later. Now, it looks like we've got hundreds of people joining us from all over the country. Just a quick housekeeping things. The chat function at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to see who you are and let us know what country you're joining us from. Please use that chat to put any questions that you may have as we go through. Of course, there'll be a Q&A session at the end, and we will cover off as much as we can from that. Now, I should explain that we have some wonderful guests here today. Sitting next to me is the wonderful Graeme Finlayson, who's our Healthy Landscape Manager. He covers the South Australian arid rangelands, and he's going to be looking after this property with his team, so he's very excited about it. And also on screen, we have the wonderful Kerrie Bennison, who's Head of Region for WA and South Australia. And the two of them have both had a chance to have a look at Evelyn Downs and check it out for us before we ticked all the boxes. Then later in the session, we're going to be joined by our Chief Financial Officer, and who is also our acting Co-CEO, Mark Dwyer, who will give us a few final sort of other elements of what the good year's been about. So let's kick off. And Kerrie, perhaps I can ask you to give us a bit of context about Evelyn Downs. And how this opportunity came to us, and I guess a bit about how it is going to help us towards our 2030 strategy.
Sure, thanks Matthew, and hello everybody. Thanks for joining us. It's so exciting to be able to talk to you about Evelyn Downs. Evelyn Downs came to us in a very special way. The owners approached Bush Heritage to ask whether we would be interested in purchasing the property. And this is really important for us. It signifies that they really want to see the hard work that they've been doing to make sure that they've kept the conservation values really strong. They want to see that in perpetuity. So they approached Bush Heritage to ask whether we would be interested, and we are very interested. It's a lovely property. In terms of our 2030 strategy, hopefully most people on the call understand that we have a very ambitious goal. We would like to deepen and double our impact on conservation throughout the country by 2030. Now, it's fairly ambitious, but we're really working very hard to try to get there. Part of that deepen and double is doubling the amount of land that in poorly represented ecosystems in the National Reserve System that we're able to get into permanent protection. And so Evelyn Downs, being such a large property, 230 or so thousand hectares, that enables us to get about 20% of the way there. So all around, given that it was the owners who approached us because they're so keen to make sure the conservation values of Evelyn Downs are protected, and Bush Heritage are looking for properties like this to really increase our impact, it's been the perfect prospect for us, and it's stunning.
Thanks, Kerrie. Now, you mentioned that it's a priority landscape for us. So perhaps, Graeme, I could ask you if you could expand on what Kerrie's mentioned and tell us a bit about how it's going to add to our portfolio and, you know, what's exciting you about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we work around Australia in what we term priority landscapes. So these are the areas where we either have reserves, work in partnerships, or are looking to grow our portfolio of conservation land management. And in South Australia, that's termed the South Australian arid rangelands. A lot of you online will be familiar with the rangelands in South Australia. It's a large portion of South Australia, typically termed the outback in South Australia. And a high proportion of this is managed for grazing purposes on pastoral leases. The two reserves we already have in the South Australian arid rangelands, Bonbon and Bulkamata, are both pastoral leases that we manage for conservation, and this will form the third property that we have in the rangelands. So really important to note that that will just about double our land management holding in South Australia. And it also has a few points of difference to the existing properties that we have in South Australia that we'll get to shortly.
Excellent. It's certainly exciting. Kerrie, you had the opportunity to visit Evelyn Downs, didn't you, last month? Can you describe the landscape to us a bit? I know we're going to have some pictures coming up behind that we've taken, and it's painted desert country, but you know, what's out there? Tell us a bit about it.
So it's very beautiful desert country. So there's that you can see in the picture there, there's these escarpments and rising hills with really large valleys in between. Particularly the painted desert gives it a little bit more colour, but it's typical arid country. So you get these vast rangelands with sort of smaller shrub types with rocky caves and hangings that species can use. And then the thing that I was really impressed with when I went, I've spent a lot of time in desert country, it is really in very good nick. You can walk around and you'll see a variety of species. Arid landscapes are not truly full of biodiversity, but they have a lot more than what you would expect. And so when you're walking through these landscapes, I was really surprised to see lots of different wildflowers popping up when I was there about 6 weeks ago. Lots of species of small ground cover, really well protected soils in most of the areas. And also walking around, it was very easy to find Aboriginal artefacts, evidence of Aboriginal people being there in the past. So all in all, I thought it was a very beautiful country. It's got the eucalypt lined creek lines that people would recognise, and then these just vast desert plains. Beautiful country. I was really excited to see it. It's got some really nice infrastructure as well. We don't spend a lot of time in Bush Heritage talking about infrastructure, but it's really important for us to be able to have dedicated people on these properties who are well looked after and able to really put their all into managing. They're very passionate people. So from a kind of more operational point of view, we're really pleased because it also has the infrastructure that allows us to have people out there looking after it into the future if we're able to purchase it.
Yes, fantastic. It's certainly impressive. Graeme, what about you? You were out there as well, weren't you? What are the opportunities you're excited about as the Healthy Landscape Manager taking on this huge property with no doubt a lot of work to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, luckily I've now had a couple of trips up there. I went up earlier in the year to do a bit of a desktop and reconnaissance trip to have a bit of a look around, and then also went out more recently to have more of a look. And I guess from my point of view, being my background's in ecology, it's really exciting to have the opportunity to learn more about the desert ecosystem out there. There's lots of areas in outback South Australia that have been understudied. So we do know bits and pieces about the various communities and species that occur, but there's a lot we don't know. And this is such a large property, and there's lots of things that I know we're going to find out, which are really exciting as an ecologist. I guess a couple of other things that you've already touched on. So firstly, the connectivity in the region to the neighbouring property, Mount Willoughby, and the opportunity to partner with an Aboriginal group, as well as across the other side of the highway, we've got a conservation reserve, Tallaringa, which for scale and impact from our point of view to hopefully influence management across such a large area is really exciting. And then finally, I guess I mentioned earlier about the point of difference to places like Bon Bon and Bulkamata, which a number of our audience listening in will be familiar with, is that it's outside the dingo fence. And so it provides a point of difference. Here's a map showing where that fence runs through South Australia. There are a healthy population of dingoes on Evelyn Downs, and it gives us that point of difference to look at how the dingo influences ecosystem function. There's lots of information out there about the value of an apex predator, and also the strong cultural connection that Aboriginal people have with the dingo. So that's a pretty exciting prospect that's very different to places like Bon Bon, where we're inside the dingo fence and surrounded by sheep farming. That you know, we don't have dingoes in that environment.
Well, I guess that will allow us to compare different management approaches either side of the fence, won't it? And actually qualify some of that.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. That's great. Now, Kerrie, what are the key steps involved, you know, at this point when we're looking at a cattle station that's had been a pastoral station for a good many years, and we've got to turn it into a conservation reserve? What's involved in that? What are the key steps?
Goodness me, it's me getting Graeme to work 24 hours a day for the next 3 years. Look, Australia's rate of extinctions, you know, is pretty well known, and a lot of that's been desert mammals. You know, we've lost lots of critical weight range, which is about 500 grams, about 2 kilos mammals in Australia, and a lot of them have been from the desert. So the exciting thing is trying to return Evelyn Downs to habitat that could possibly allow us to see some of those rare species. So look, as we said before, the owners have really managed Evelyn Downs very well. So that's one really big plus for us. You know, it's certainly not run down and clapped out like some properties, but we definitely do need to make sure that grazing is reduced as much as possible. So at the moment, we're going through a process of thinking about how the cattle would be removed, and that's obviously the very first step. It would be really interesting, though. Graeme and his ecology team will definitely set up some monitoring before and after, so that we can really look. It gives us a really great opportunity to see what impact cattle have in this landscape, and what happens when we remove the cattle and return the landscape to not being grazed by cattle. And then there will be other species, other hoof species that are out there that we'll need to think about removing, like donkeys and some other species. A really important first step will be trying to understand exactly what is there. So a lot of baseline biodiversity surveys, you know, it's a very big property, as of Graeme and I've talked about. It's in good nick. So what could still be there? You know, what promises and surprises are awaiting us as we start to do the surveys? So Graeme will have a lot more organisational perspective about what happens. But for me, if we're able to purchase this property, it will definitely be removing the cattle, making sure we set the monitoring up so that we can see the impact, and then spending a year or two just knowing exactly what we have. And then we can start to sort of target our management regimes around what's there or what we want to bring back.
Yes, because that's important to us, isn't it? That we can measure in the future and say, we started with this and we had this sort of vegetation condition, and we're going to be able to measure, you know, 5 and 10 years down the line and actually show what a difference it makes, the different management approaches. And what about the cultural heritage surveys? Because that's an important part of our preliminary work, isn't it, as well?
Absolutely. Thanks for reminding me, Matthew. This is a very important cultural area with songlines that run from kind of up near Uluru down through the area down to Coopapedy. So our understanding from our discussions with our traditional owners and Bruce Hammond, our Aboriginal Partnership Manager, is there are some extremely significant sites, cultural sites on Evelyn Downs. And so our initial work will need to be, where are those sites? What are the management protocols around them? Are they gender-based sites? Is it only specific people, traditional owners, who can go there? Do we need to approach the site with somebody or just put a sort of buffer around it that we don't go? So that will give Graeme and his team a bit of a map to be able to make sure that we manage the cultural heritage well. Sometimes it will just be don't go. Sometimes there might be areas that actually need management, like rock art sites that we need to keep fire out of, or feral animals, but we're not really sure yet. That's also a beginning journey that we're just starting right at the moment.
And I guess without cattle, we won't necessarily need some of those artificial watering points, which disrupt the natural cycles of water supply and movement of creatures.
Absolutely. And there'll be don't want to steal too much of Graeme's thunder, but I imagine that he will be looking at each of the sites and trying to understand site by site what's the best way to remove the artificial waters, making sure that we speak with the South Australian Pastoral Board and our neighbours and keep them informed with what we do. But definitely the intention will be to gradually close as many of those water points as possible to help us further control grazing.
Now, I know there are some fantastic beasties and some fantastic plants that may or may not be out on Evelyn Downs. I know because I read the report for the Mount Willoughby IPA this week, which records some of the things that have been seen. So I'd like to ask you both, perhaps Graeme, start with you. What are the critters that and some of the animals that you may have come across and things that you might be hoping to see?
Yeah, that's there's certainly a long list of things that we'd hope to see, and having been out there a couple of times, I still acknowledge that there's a lot we need to find out. So a lot of the baseline surveys will give us an indication of some of the things that are there, and then obviously with seasonal fluctuations in these sorts of environments, the animals will turn up that we didn't expect to find, and in certain seasons will disappear. There was a photograph just went up recently of a bustard. So we had a really good sighting of a male. There he is there, a male bustard while we were out on site. So it's nice to see those around. It's a really special bird, both culturally and ecologically. There's a number of threatened species that are identified that have had some work done already on Evelyn Downs. So the Arkaringa daisy is an endemic species to the Arkaringa ranges. And also the bronzeback legless lizard. Again, it's had some targeted surveys done.
I've heard a little bit about this lizard. Perhaps you can tell us if this is true. I read that this inoffensive-looking legless lizard that looks a little bit like a snake, but actually lives in deep leaf litter, doesn't it, by stream banks, and does a death roll like a crocodile in order to dismember its insect prey. Is this right? This sounds very dramatic. Great piece of storytelling.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it.
I like the sound of that. I'm looking forward to meeting a bronzeback legless lizard from a distance. What else?
Well, then there's a whole suite of arid zone birds that come and go through the seasons. Luckily, when we were up there, there was earlier in the year, there'd been quite a bit of rain. We've had some really good seasons the last couple of years. And for anyone who's been out to Bon Bon and Bulkamata the last 18 months, we've had a phenomenal response of vegetation and then birds. Yeah. So targeted bird surveys right across the property will be a high priority. And then I suppose, we did get to see a few dingoes. That's always a good thing, an exciting thing to see. And then I think from my point of view, I've always had a strong interest in mammals, and Kerrie's already mentioned some of the arid zone mammal species that have disappeared.
Right.
It's actually fascinating to explore some of the caves on the property and find these massive historical stick nest rat nests. Yeah. And although the species is now extinct from mainland Australia, it's kind of a reminder of what was there. And I guess you know, what could be restored if all things go to plan. But I think it's just a nest frozen in time that is a gentle reminder of what once roamed the land. And
this isn't a nest this size, is it?
No,
these are very
enormous.
Substantial pile with very large sticks.
Yeah.
Yes, I've often wondered how a small rat could actually move around some fairly substantial bits of timber.
Yeah,
but they do, don't they?
Pretty amazing.
Kerrie, what about you? What are the critters and the plants that is most fascinating you?
Yeah, I've, as mentioned, spent a lot of time in the desert, and I was really struck by the bustards Graeme mentioned. I mean, they're beautiful birds, you know, they're quite tall and they walk through the landscape and stick out, but they were so friendly, for want of a better term. Like I'm used to them, you know, seeing a car and taking off and being quite rare. But these ones, you know, I saw several, and you could stop by the side of the road and get out and take some photos, and they would just kind of hang around. It was really nice to see how comfortable they were, because they stand out. It's like ostriches on a plane, you know, they look amazing. The other thing that I was struck by, you know, you think of desert as pretty one colour. I was amazed by the colour of Evelyn Downs, and it was in the sort of really deep rubies and reds of the rocks, but it was also in the scattered wildflowers that I saw around, you know, pink and purple and yellow, and I was quite surprised to see how much colour there is out there, and that was partly the landscape itself and partly the wildflowers that were there. So they were kind of my two favourites. And then did do a little bit of walking around at night, and foxes and cats are obviously out there, but it will be really interesting to see what impact that the dingoes might be having to manage some of their numbers, because I certainly saw dingoes and I didn't see as any foxes or cats that I might have expected. So that was probably the other thing that struck me. I don't want to make any promises, but it will be very interesting to see how the predator dynamics are working on Evelyn Downs.
And I guess one of the challenges for the team is going to be that it's likely we're heading into a dry period, isn't it, in the arid interior of Australia. So it looks pretty green at the moment for that part of the world, but I guess that's all going to change, isn't it, as we dry out over the next period.
But remembering that the species are adapted, that's what they're there for. So it's whether the seeds remain in the soil and happy, or whether the river red gums adapted to not having a lot of water. So obviously, I guess in the desert, the species grow up with ways to deal with boom and bust cycles. So it's great to know what we saw, I guess, is that after a bit of rain, the species are still there, and they do pop up in the desert landscape, and their resilient techniques to coping with drought are working. So yes, it'll be dry and getting drier, but as long as we manage it as well as we can, I think that we're in really good place at the moment to make sure those species are able to withstand changing climate, but also just dry years.
Fantastic. Well, in a blatant link and plug to our last webinar where we talked about Plains Wanderer, is there a Plains Wanderer angle to this story? Graeme, perhaps that's one you can answer.
I think historical distributions would say they could turn up there, but yeah,
not yet. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
No, well, there's all sorts of wonderful desert birds, aren't there, that are nomadic and, as Kerrie said, move through the region. So we're looking forward to seeing what the reports are as they come through.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I guess there's going to be some challenges that come with acquiring a property like this. We talked about some of the lovely beasts, but of course there's the day job, isn't there, of managing the fire, managing ferals, managing weeds. What do you see as the biggest challenges for you and the team?
Yeah, well, I think Kerrie's already mentioned that grazing pressure is an identified threat. So we have feral donkeys, feral horses, camels come through that area occasionally as well. And then other ones that are probably less obvious in the landscape, like rabbits, but well known to cause big impact. So managing those as a key threatening process are really important, and then obviously slowly removing the cattle, as we've talked about. Other threats like erosion, I think a few of the photos probably showed some of those. There's one there. and then introduce predators as well. So we all know about the cat situation in Australia and the impact that cats have on native species. The weed load out there is relatively low. So compared to a lot of properties where we have more rainfall, the weed load over there is pretty low. We do have the risk of buffel grass, which some of our audience may be aware of the impact buffel grass is having in the Northern Territory at the moment, linked to some of the fires and suffocating landscapes, basically. The biggest risk of buffel grass is along some of the waterways and roadsides. So that's a biosecurity risk, but also something we do actively manage. Otherwise, I mean, there's lots of uncertainty in arid areas of Australia at the moment. We know that rainfall patterns are changing. We know that, we're going to get heat waves and droughts. These things are going to come, and there's evidence now that they're coming more frequently. And so protecting a property of this scale actually provides a bit of a buffer, I think, to lots of these species and communities in these areas, just by removing some of these threats that are on the reserve. So it's a really good opportunity for us.
Fantastic. Well, that's a little sort of insight into why we're also excited about this potential acquisition, and we're part way through the process of fundraising for that, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. But the last thing I'd like to do is, first of all, invite any questions that you may have. Please pop them in the chat so that Kerrie and Graeme can respond to them. And then I'd like to welcome and introduce Mark Dwyer, who's our Chief Financial Officer, and at the moment he's also co-acting CEO. Mark, I think you're going to pop up on the screen. Welcome. And when Mark appears, he's actually been listening in, I think. There we go. Fantastic. Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm great, Matthew. Is that coming through okay?
It is, loud and clear. Evelyn Downs is all consuming. Sorry. Evelyn Downs has been all consuming, I think, internally, hasn't it, for the past few weeks as we've kicked off this fundraising campaign. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that we've had a really big year anyway. So I think as you're overseeing all the elements of the organisation at the moment until our new CEO comes on board, perhaps you could share with us what your highlights have been for the past 12 months.
Sure. Thanks for that, Matthew. And it's obviously hard to go past the Evelyn Downs acquisition opportunity. It's really exciting for us as an organisation. Largest area, sort of biggest dollar amount for an acquisition, and as the team's discussed earlier, just the opportunities there are enormous. So everyone's really excited about that in the organisation. More broadly, I think a big highlight for us for the year was returning to a full year of supporter events and on-country visits after obviously several years of disruption through COVID. So this included donor reserve trips, supporter functions countrywide, and many, many more volunteers that were out on country helping our reserve staff. A wonderful example of one of those was the 20-year anniversary event held at Charles Darwin Reserve in Buttermire Country in WA, which you can see on the screen there. So 20 years since our acquisition of that reserve, and there's a really loyal community of volunteers and donors for that particular reserve that they're so passionate about. Another highlight was further developing our third impact area, which is the natural capital in agriculture. We've now worked with multiple partners across the agricultural sector, with those partners having land holdings in excess of 3 million hectares, with us providing condition assessments and also ecological consulting and project management services to really support our partners' biodiversity and ecological enhancement objectives. Another highlight is just continuing the implementation of our 2030 strategy more broadly. It's to deepen and double our impact. So in the past financial year, so the year that we finished at the end of March of this year, that actually represented our largest ever operating expenditure program for bush heritage at over $33 million. And that represented an increase of nearly $20 million over the previous year. Our expectations are for this current financial year, we'll be doing the same sort of increase again, and our operating expenditure will be closer to $40 million. Now, this increased level of activity, that's only been possible due to the generous funding and from our loyal supporters. So I guess the real highlight here is that continued loyalty and support from those donors and volunteers. Fifth highlight is that as an organisation, we're really investing in the next generation of conservationists through our Seeding the Future program. And with generous dedicated funding for this program, we currently support 12 interns and a number of PhD students, and they're actively engaged in key conservation activities right across the Bush Heritage portfolio. So that's just a snippet, but I think they provide a good representation of all the things that we're doing across the organisation. Matthew, you did mention, I think, maybe a sneak preview for a highlight for our 2024 year. Will be the start of our new CEO, Rachel Lowry, in February. We're all looking forward to Rachel coming on board to leverage a deep experience in the sector and harnessing her clear passion for conservation, to really lead Bush Heritage through the next stage of our journey.
Yes, that's certainly going to make a change for us all next year. Thanks, Mark, for that. And last call in for any questions. If anybody would like to direct any questions to Mark about our future growth plans or what the future holds, and please do that. Now, we have had some questions coming in, so let's head to some of those and see if we can respond to those. There's a question from Anne Gorton, which is about, I think we've covered most of this, but I think it's a useful question to consider, which is, how many cattle, how many other horrible hooved herbivores, as I call them, might there be on the property that we need to look after and get rid of? And how will exclusion be managed once it's acquired? I know, Graeme, you mentioned to me that there is an adjustment arrangement at the moment for the existing cattle, but that's a transitional phase, isn't it? But while the new owner takes them off.
Yeah, so we will inherit the adjustment arrangement, and it will take a while to remove the remaining cattle.
Ruffle them up, yeah.
The numbers, I'd be guessing at the number of cattle overall, but there were around about 1,800 removed initially, and then there might be nearly that again to remove over the next probably 9 to 12 months.
Yeah.
In terms of the number of feral herbivores, I wouldn't have a clue.
No.
But yeah, there's definitely donkeys. I didn't see any camels, but there's certainly records of camels across that area.
Yeah.
And we'll be working pretty closely with the neighbours at Mount Willoughby in regards to horses. They are really fond of working on horseback still, and certainly have a strong connection with the horses out there. So and in terms of exclusion, we maintain boundary fences because obviously we want to protect our assets, which are the vegetation communities on our reserves. So ensuring that boundary fences are secure is a key thing.
Yeah. And what about rabbits? You mentioned rabbits earlier on. There was a question about whether RCD has done its job. Now, I'm not familiar with that acronym.
Yeah, so RCD is referring to the rabbit hemorrhagic virus, so Kerrie virus, a lot of people call it. Look, I don't know the stats on sort of prevalence of RCD out on a place like Evelyn Downs, but certainly RHDV2, the second strain that's been acknowledged, is prevalent through the rangelands. We've seen knockdown of populations on places like Bon Bon and Bulkamata. It continues to be a really effective biocontrol of rabbits, and is why populations are lower than perhaps some of us have seen in our lifetime. So I would guess that it's definitely impacting rabbits out there, but there's still potentially a bit of work to do to get those remaining ones and continue.
There's always some little somewhere. Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, I can see lots of the questions coming in, which is fantastic. Now, there's a really interesting question, perhaps Kerrie, throw this one to you, which is, what's our main aim for the property? Is it reintroduction of species, or is there anything more? And I guess that's a hard one to answer at this stage, but you have touched upon it a little bit in terms of, what our purposes are. Perhaps you could expand on that.
Yeah, of course. Healthy country protected forever. So if we go ahead and purchase Evelyn Downs, Graeme and I will be talking to the South Australian government about native vegetation heritage listings that the government are allowing, with some hopeful changes to the Pastoral Act in South Australia. So the ultimate aim is protection forever. So that would be a legislative process that we would try to get a covenant to make sure that it is. In terms of reintroductions, Bush Heritage are writing a reintroduction strategy next year, I'm told, by our science and leader, Rebecca Spindler. Fencing is not necessarily something that Bush Heritage do. That's not, we would like to see species return because they have a landscape scale area to move across. So we won't be looking at fencing, but introduction of species from a functional point of view. So if there's predators missing, or if there's soil engineers missing, or what does the landscape need, we certainly would think about that in more a rewilding approach if we can get the predator numbers right. So we hope reintroduction might be something in Graeme's and my future, but we'll see what the strategy says. We'll see what's there first. We'll see what's missing in terms of keeping the landscape healthy, and that will direct what we decide to do in terms of reintroduction of species. Graeme, did you want to jump in at all there?
No, I think you've pretty much nailed it. There is some people may have heard of a little critter called a Kerrie or Kawari. I think the pronunciation is often misused, but one of our partner organisations, Arid Recovery, have just released some into their fenced reserve as a stopgap for a decline in the species across its range, and there are historical records of that species on Evelyn Downs. So it's one that it's a carnivorous marsupial, a dasyurid, and certainly one of the species that would be pretty cool to see roaming again in this area. So it's one probably I've got a close eye on. But the key from my point of view is understanding what's there first, and that will take time because these ecosystems are slow to respond. We've talked about the boom bust nature of these environments, and that can there can be a 10-year gap between decent rainfall events at times. So it's a bit of a waiting game, and it's a bit of a accumulation of information time. So I think from my point of view, reintroductions are a bit of an icing on the cake, particularly in an open landscape. So finding out what's there, figuring out the dynamics, and then looking at what's missing and seeing if it is possible to replace would be the ideal approach.
Yeah. When you're managing an open landscape like that with so many influences, then I get that, as you say, that if you can then do a successful reintroduction, you've done your job. But it's not an easy job to get there, is it?
No.
Not by a long way, no. There was a question here, perhaps Mark, I can ask you this one. It's about how do we make sure that our properties stay in our portfolio forever? Because we say healthy country protected forever, and we mean that. And I know we have those conversations internally. And linked to that, the question was who owns the title. So perhaps from that perspective, I know you've been involved in the ongoing acquisition. Perhaps you could just respond to that one in terms of how title and how we work to make sure that once we've got it, we look after it forever.
Sure, Matthew. Thanks for that, and it's a good question. With this property, it's actually a Crown lease that's administered by the South Australian government. So they're very long-dated leases. And once you've been granted as the leaseholder, there is a process thereby where you can apply to have that renewed again over that very long time frame. It's a very similar structure that we have in our existing reserves in South Australia, as well as reserves in other areas that are on Crown leased land. So the tenure there is it's really quite secure, and we obviously adhere to the requirements of the lease that the government sets up. I think South Australia also has the opportunity to apply different levels of agreements and covenants over those leases as well. And our two properties in South Australia, Bulkamata and Bonbon, both have those overlays with them, and we'd be looking to get the same level of protection with Evelyn Downs once the Crown lease is transferred over to Bush Heritage. And I think thirdly, there is some ongoing initiatives within the South Australian government about I guess, furthering the use of Crown lands for conservation and other purposes as well. So we're closely involved in that process with the South Australian Government, and our view on that is that that should lead to greater certainty of tenure over the property as well. But Graeme, you're obviously close to that. Is there anything else in that response that you'd like to add to?
No, I think that's pretty much nailed it. Yeah, it's a bit of a watch this space with some of the legislative changes that are going on at the moment in South Australia, and certainly in Western Australia, we're keenly watching what happens with the legislation as well. So some similar issues over there with taking on conservation management on a lease.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And there's a sort of link question that's come through, which is, it is a big property. How many extra staff are we thinking might need to be employed to manage it? I know this is a bit of a hot topic, Mark, because you're asking for budgets at the moment and no doubt considering this. So maybe that can't be answered at the moment, but conservation needs at least as many people as a pastoral company does, doesn't it, to manage the landscape?
I might throw that one to Kerrie, because Kerrie's been working with Graeme on what we think they'll have there in terms of on the ground requirements, and clearly we want to get the resources there that's going to be making an impact for a property of that size. So we'll be making sure that the resources that we apply to it is commensurate with what we're trying to achieve with that property. But I think, as Kerrie mentioned as well, the other benefit with this property is just the extent and quality of the infrastructure that comes with the property as well. So we're really well set up to have multiple resources there. And I think I might be jumping ahead with some of the questions here, Matthew, but while I've got the speaker, there was a couple of questions about it is a little bit more remote, so maybe it's not as opportune for volunteers. But again, that level of infrastructure provides probably more opportunity for us, and probably a little bit more comfort for volunteers than some of our other reserves. But I might throw back to Kerrie on the specific requirements for the reserve management.
Yeah, well, first thing we need to do is clone Graeme. So we'll get 3 Graeme. That'll be good. And then we'll have we'll definitely have a reserve manager. So we'll have a permanent presence on the property, and likely also an extra staff member, a field officer out there. But the main thing will be a very large ecology team and lots of work from our Aboriginal Partnership Manager, Graeme. So, sorry, Bruce. So Graeme, Will and Pat, who's our South Australian ecologist, will have a bit more ecology resources available to them. So we'll employ, hopefully, if it all goes through okay, another ecologist. And so as a team, they'll spend time there doing the surveys that we talked about. Bruce, we're quite lucky that the IPA next door, the Mount Willoughby IPA, has a permanent presence of people as well. So we'll look very much to have them involved in the property. And then we'll also, I noted a question that Mark mentioned, it. We definitely would want lots and lots of volunteers, and the accommodation is really good for them. So I imagine that Graeme will be trying to fill lots of spaces with volunteers. So ecology volunteers, infrastructure maintenance volunteers, people who are really keen to help us get the property up and running. So it's a bit of a garbled answer. So definitely a permanent presence, 1 or 2 people based on the reserve all the time, and then a really big influx of ecology support. To summarise.
Thanks, Kerrie. Yes, and further to that question about volunteering, yes, please get in contact with us. Megan, our producer, who puts these wonderful webinars together, can probably drop in a URL, a connection for talking to our volunteer team. We always love having volunteers out on reserves, and as Kerrie says, there'll be lots to do. Linked to that question was one from Jill, came in before the webinar, which was who's going to be travelling through the area in next year, and what are the opportunities to get an experience. Now, obviously, it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of people coming through to get one of these properties up and running. So in terms of visitation, that will probably take a while yet. But the good news is the Painted Desert Road, Graeme tells me, runs right through the property. That's a public access road. So for the adventurous traveller who wants to get a taste of what Evelyn Downs is like, a drive along the Painted Desert Road will give you some exposure to some of those wonderful landscapes that you've been seeing in the background pictures there. Just before we go to a couple of final questions about the acquisition, there is one I think is a question here worthy of answering, and Graeme can probably start the response to this. It's about how many relationships do we have with universities, and how many opportunities do we provide for students? We actually have quite a big program called Seeding the Future, where we support interns, we support PhDs, scholarships, and it's been incredibly successful. And Graeme and I actually sat at the University of Adelaide right now, where we're having this webinar. So Graeme, I know you've got students here working for you and lots of opportunities. Perhaps you can just give a brief sense of just how important they are to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a visiting or adjunct position at the university. So I've got access to the university system and fit in with the spatial sciences team here on the North Terrace campus, where I supervise one PhD student who's looking at various remote sensing tools for conservation monitoring, and a second student who is in the School of Biological Sciences, who we've heard from previously, Saskia Gahadi, who's working on Plains Wanderers. And Pat, who Kerrie mentioned before, he also has a visiting position at the University of Adelaide. So we have a strong connection to the University of Adelaide, where we do have the opportunity to engage undergraduate, postgraduate students. Pat also has a connection to Flinders University, where he did some of his university degree, and we go and give presentations at the university to sort of highlight what Bush Heritage does and our desire to get students working on key projects.
Yeah, fantastic.
We also, for all of our projects around the country or properties, we identify key knowledge gaps. So we have a knowledge strategy, which is advertised through our website, and people can approach us to either express interest in some of these knowledge gaps or come to us with other projects that might be of interest or might align with what we're trying to achieve on the property. So typically our research is focused on trying to find out how effective our management is. So assessing how effective certain management interventions are. But then obviously there's other aspects of life on reserves that come up that are of interest to research projects as well. So lots of things to find out and lots of opportunities to engage students all over the country. So,
and what you've just described is copied in pretty much every university around the country, isn't it? Because I know we have connections with almost every university in terms of responding to the other part of that question and different research themes and projects.
Absolutely. And a number have happened on our South Australian reserves, even with universities not in South Australia. So we work closely with the University of New South Wales, for example, on Bulkamata. So lots of student involvement.
Well, listen, the last questions here are to do with actually what it's going to take to get this acquisition across the line, which is very topical. One of them is, apart from the purchase cost, what setup and recurrent costs do we anticipate? Because obviously we've got to pay staff, we've got maybe some renovations, vehicles, that sort of thing. I know that's all part of the budget planning and what Kerrie and you are working on, Mark, with to put that together. But I guess our most urgent fundraising priority is to get the funds needed to purchase the place. And then, of course, you've got ongoing costs. So we typically aim to get the first 5 years of operating costs included in the fundraising target for any new property, because you don't want to acquire a new property and suddenly find you can't afford to run it. That wouldn't work. So that means that at the present, we've got our remaining target of 2.4 million, which we're looking to raise, which is part of the overall acquisition cost. And that's something that we went public with in the last couple of weeks to help us get the last little bit across the line. So we've had some wonderful support already. We've had some significant gifts already pledged. And there is one particularly lovely couple who have offered to match dollar for dollar any donations made between now and Christmas. And so a shout out and thank you to that couple who are, I think, on the webinar today for supporting this acquisition. That's really wonderful. And we'd love to invite you to make a contribution if you can. We'll put a link in the chat of where you can go and do that. And equally, we acknowledge that the support we get from the family of Bush Heritage supporters may be in many forms, whether that's donations for acquisitions, whether you have a small amount donated every month. We have all our volunteers, and we have people who give us pro bono expertise, and people who are considering us in their wills. So thank you so much to all those people, because it's only through that and through those pledges that we can be as ambitious as we are at looking to double and deepen our impact and reach that 2030 strategy. So I think basically the last point is, if you can, please help us. We'd love to get this across the line by Christmas. If you'd like to talk to anybody about it rather than just make a donation, please do. Please get in touch with us through whoever your contacts are. We'd love to talk more about it. We have got so many stories and so much information in terms of telling the story of the place. And I'll just finish off, in case anybody's got any fundraising questions right at the end or want to know any more, please chuck them in the chat and they'll come through to me very shortly. Any last points you'd like to make, Kerrie or Graeme? This is your baby.
Just a really huge thank you, both to the owners who have given us this opportunity, to Graeme, who is working so hard to make it become a reality, and to the people who are on this call. It's a really amazing thing to wake up every day and know that your job is possible because people care about conservation enough to donate. And that's a really big thing that we take very seriously. So I just want to say a really big thank you.
Yeah, likewise from me. I'm often blown away by the generosity of people, a number of who would be on the call today. And, you know, you meet lots of people who are just genuinely caring and interested in what we do. And without them, we couldn't do what we do. So yes, it's something that I think about a lot. And it's amazing to have opportunities like this where, you know, a collective group of people are going to help us deliver this project. So it's yeah, thank you very much.
And it's the biggest acquisition we've done for, I think in all my time here, actually. It's nearly 8 years. So it's part of the reason why we're so pleased to be able to get involved with something like this and make such a difference, isn't it? Well, listen, Mark, is there anything else you wanted to finish up with?
No, just completely echoing Kerrie and Graeme's comments there, and I guess the humbling feeling that we all have that makes all this possible, and I think also the confidence of our ability to use those donations in a really impactful way, as we've been able to show over the history of the organisation.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us today, everybody. As always, if you've got a couple of minutes available, please hang around. We've got a lovely slideshow at the end of even more beautiful images of Evelyn Downs. And from the team here at Bush Heritage, hope you have a wonderful, safe and happy festive season. And we look forward to more of these wonderful opportunities to share the work we do in the webinars and supporter morning teas and volunteer opportunities and all the wonderful things that go to make up being part of the Bush Heritage family. Thank you very much. Goodbye from us.